Gordon Brown outlined plans for major reforms of the political system. He promised that a Labour government would introduce fixed-term parliaments and a referendum on reforming the voting system for Westminster. Mr Brown said the measures would appeal to the Liberal Democrats, and he refused to rule out sharing power after the election. But he told the BBC that that was in the voters' hands, as James Landale reports.
The final hours of a much criticised Parliament. There's always work being done here, but it's the institution that needs rebuilding, not just the bricks and mortar. Today, Gordon Brown set out his ideas, what he called the most comprehensive constitutional reforms for a century. Much of it was familiar, but there were new plans, a long list, for a new audience perhaps.
Labour's manifesto will also include a new commitment to fixed-term parliaments. I want the reform of the electoral system so that no member of Parliament is elected without the majority support of those who vote in their constituencies. I want the British people to be served by an elected House of Lords.
Well, that is some prospectus for day two of what could be the closest election campaign in a generation. Not schools, not hospitals, but referendums on electoral reform in the House of Lords. Now, these are not issues that get most people out of bed, unless they're Lib Dem MPs. So how much was the Prime Minister appealing to the Lib Dem leadership? Well, today on the BBC he admitted for the first time it was for voters to decide whether he'd have to share power after the election.
Would you work with other parties, if necessary, to keep the Conservatives out?
It's back to what I said, it's a matter for the people. Now, the people will make the decision in this election. Before they do so, I think it would be premature for parties to be talking about anything other than what we're doing.
But the Lib Dems were having none of it. What they want is a totally reformed electoral system that better matches the votes cast to the number of seats each party gets.
If Labour and the Conservatives get their way, the Parliament, returned on May the 6th, will be no different from the one being dissolved this weekend. If Labour and the Conservatives get their way, only the faces will change. All the corruption, all the sleaze, all the big money, all the backroom dealings will stay.
The Tories were just as sceptical of Labour's reforms.
I think the political reform, the electoral reform that people really want to see is what we're proposing, a reduction in the size of the House of Commons, the power to recall members of Parliament, ministers cutting their salaries, the public being able to put issues before Parliament directly. That's real political reform.
What all parties agree is that in the wake of the expenses scandal, people should have the right, under certain conditions, to force a by-election and vote out MPs found guilty of financial wrongdoing. Tonight, as MPs prepared to abandon Westminster, the Lib Dems made clear that flattery would get Labour nowhere. At least for now. James Landale, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's talk to our political editor, Nick Robinson, who's at Westminster for us tonight. Nick, let's start with these planned reforms, these political reforms. What is the significance of this package, do you think?
Well, I think we got a real insight into Gordon Brown's thinking about the future tonight, Hugh. His future. Because we know that the election number crunchers will be telling Gordon Brown what they tell us, that it is hard, as the polls stand at the moment, to see Labour getting a clear overall majority once again. But it is quite easy to see the prospect that the Labour Party may get more seats than the Tories and be able to stay in power if they can get support from other parties. And it seems to me that what Gordon Brown was doing today was not only making some important proposals for reform that people may like or dislike, but what he was also trying to do is to begin to construct an offer that the Liberal Democrats would find it very, very hard to refuse. Voting reform, Lords reform, and giving away the power for a Prime Minister to determine the date of an election. He says, of course, that it is a matter for the people. It's up to them how they vote. But normally people in his position say, of course I'm going to win. I don't even need to contemplate such things.
And Nick, on the main exchanges of the day, if I can call them that, on national insurance, they've been going on now for several weeks in some form. What do you think has happened there? Is that near resolution?
It isn't, because I think, curiously, Hugh, all sides want this debate to go on. The Tories are delighted that they've got the endorsement of business leaders, not just for their proposal to limit this tax rise, but also for the need to cut waste and get down the deficit. But oddly, Gordon Brown is keen to have this debate. He thinks he can highlight that the Tories want to take money out of the economy and also would either have to cut services more or increase taxes, and he's got the Liberal Democrat support as well. This, I'm afraid, if you're bored with it, is the debate that will go on because it highlights the different parties' approaches to this very important question.
Nick, we'll talk to you again a little later. Thank you very much for now. Nick Robinson there at Westminster. So let's turn to the day.